So, planning. First and foremost, you don't have to do it. It's really important to realise that people talk about how to do this, that, and the other. But I think with writing, you've got to find your own way of doing things. And if it destroys the story for you to plan, don't bother. For me, I've never known what I'm going to write until I start to write it. But there comes a point when I've done about 4,000 words when I have to kind of sit and take stock and decide where the story's going to go. This is largely historic because the first novel I sold to Bloomsbury, I sold off 3 chapters and a synopsis. So I sent that to them, and then they wanted to know what was going to happen chapter by chapter, which was really tricky because I'd not written it and I'd never written a novel before. But anyway, I did work out what was going to happen. And that technique was actually quite useful because it allowed me to save time by writing to that particular plot. But that really doesn't work for everyone. And in fact, it hasn't always worked for me. The last thing I wrote, I didn't have a plan at all. Kind of showed, and it means that it takes a bit longer to revise afterwards because then you've got to kind of impose a shape on it that doesn't already exist. You might have looked on my website and seen my circular plan. That really came about because of the exam thing, when I used to have to do exams in a certain time. So for me, it's very natural to translate words on a page to time on a clock. But also it allows me to kind of imagine when things are going to have to happen. So if you envisage the whole narrative as a clock, so the end of the story is right next to the beginning, and that kind of reminds you to sort out whatever plot problem you began the story with. I mean, sometimes you will get what I call, kind of mission creep in a story, where you start off just under something simple, like I guess Harry Potter wanted to have friends and ends up kind of fighting Voldemort and saving the world, which is a fantastic amount of mission creep. But that can happen even in a small story where you begin thinking you want to do one thing and you realise that in order to do that you have to do something else and something else and something else. It doesn't matter as long as the end has connection to the beginning and the reader feels that they've had a completely satisfying plot journey. I tend to think about the quarter past and the half past as being quite key turning points. Lots of people talk about a 3-act structure. And I suppose I do write to a 3-act structure, but I tend to think of it as in 4 quarters because it just suits the way my mind works. So the first quarter is largely set up of the difficulties. The second quarter is setting up and building to a real turning point at the halfway mark, which has to be both in the action, in terms of the action and what's physically going on with the characters, whether there's a big battle or something, but a physical turning point, but also an emotional turning point. They might realise something, they're in love or something happens at that point. Then the next quarter is really just complicating things and making things harder for the characters. And the final quarter is the resolution. It may work for you. It doesn't matter if try anything. I divide off each of the sections into chapters. So if in a typical story of mine, there would be it would be 80,000 words, 40 chapters of 2,000 each. So each chapter is broadly 2,000 words. And so I would get chapter 20 is my halfway point. And that enabled me to just write one line as to what happened to happen in each chapter. And it doesn't happen all in one go. I have several goes at it. And quite often I can't see past the halfway point. And when that happens, I don't always have a story. There's a couple of novels I've tried to write that I've actually died at the halfway point. So for me, I know that if I can't imagine beyond the halfway point, there's a possibility that I'm in trouble. Sometimes I get there and I can see it, but not always. Other people write in different ways. Patricia Reeder, who's an online friend of mine, she does this thing where she writes a synopsis, writes the first chapter, changes the synopsis to accommodate what she's done in that first chapter, does another synopsis, writes the second chapter, and so on all the way through. So she always knows where she's going, but it changes with every chapter she writes. I just haven't got the patience for that. Other friends of mine will write the main scenes on yellow post-its and arrange them on a board and move them around to find an order that works for them. Particularly, that's really helpful if you write out of order. Generally speaking, I begin at the beginning and write through to the end. But lots of people I know don't do that. They write the scenes that they want and tie them together. And they write, the ones that interest them. And that's absolutely fine. There is no wrong way of writing a novel. Anything that you can make work is good. So you could look at the post-it thing. You can do that, the thing I suggested in in editing where you do a synopsis at the end and then edit to that synopsis, and that often is another way of moving forward. Because if you're not terrifically organised in the writing of it, you have to be more organised in the editing of it. But it really, honestly, plan or not plan, do what suits you best. I hope that's helpful.